Are you parenting your employees? And this is such a fun topic to explore because this is not something that a lot of times is being openly talked about because it comes with a little bit of judgment. We can acknowledge how we are showing up right now with our team or the team we want to hire and making sure we're not falling back into parenting mode, which for some of you may come very naturally. You may already be a parent and you're like really attached to this idea. So what I want to show you is I've got some different questions probed out. We're going to break it down and then give you a simple tactic that you can look at to see if this is where you're going. So for example, are you trying to give your employees, your contractors, whoever's working with you, a lot of different rules? Like you as the manager, you as the leader, you are keep giving rules. And rules can be like, yes, a clearly outlined rule in your job description, or it can be rules on like, I want it done this way and it wasn't done exactly that way. So go back, revise until it gets exactly like this. That's a rule too, versus an expectation. And an expectation is what we have for our entire team, you should, in place, as well as expectations for a particular role. And expectations are different than rules, and we would explain that and break that down even more greatly for you. But in this time set, in what we have right here, right now, is understanding that rules are trying to tell them exactly what to do and how to do it. And you're like, oh yes, sign me up for that. That sounds great. But that takes out any creativity, that takes out any self-expression, that takes out any ownership on their part. Whereas an expectation gets them going in the right direction. And maybe it's not going to be exactly the way you would have done it, but could that be okay? Could it still be awesome? Could it still achieve the goal? And that's one of the bigger shifts that you start to make as a leader, is that you start to see how can your team show up in their own gifts, in their own abilities, and get the goal done, even if it's not like exactly how you would have done it. And honestly, that can be one of the most surprising things to learn as a leader and start to take on, especially if this is your own business or this is a department you've worked really hard to create. You're like, well, the way I did it was really awesome. But allowing them to see how they can come in as well and add their own twist and flavor, their own area of expertise, is very empowering, and you're going to get better dynamics out of your team doing that. So think expectations and not rules. With that, another way that you want more expectations in place and boundaries even is when you're trying to control them. So go back to that example of the fact that you're saying it's not done exactly how I would have done it, right? And maybe you don't obviously use those words, but you're really leaning into that and you're like, One time early on in my career, I edited an article, and when I took it back to the girl who had written it, and first of all, it was a grammatical nightmare. So there was a lot of marks, a lot of editing, and she like totally freaked out. But she said, "You've lost my voice." And so we had this whole conversation around that. But because she's like, it's almost like you should have just written it because now it sounds like you wrote it. And for me, that was a learning dynamic because I had to learn that, hey, the way that she can write, did it achieve the outcome that we wanted? As somebody reads this, is it in the voice of the business, not necessarily my voice? Is it getting the message across in a way that maybe I wouldn't have done, but still is effective and still works? And so there was this balance that had to be found there as far as like getting good, clear writing skills. That's a must. Like that would be something that obviously we want as a clearly set expectation. But the voice of it, is there some finessing there that we can allow other people's voices to pop up? And so one of the things I want you to see is like when you're trying to overly control your team, it stifles their ability. And that's a lot of times where people are going to leave. They're going to go take another job. They're going to do something where they can feel that they have more ownership. People want to attach to that idea of being able to own, take responsibility, see their ideas come to fruition. But if you're always trying to control everything, then that's where you personally need some boundaries and expectations for how you lead and what your team is supposed to do. You knowing they have expectations to me is going to allow you to take off that pressure from yourself so you don't have to feel so much control. That's micromanaging too, right? So that term, micromanaging, if you've been trying to avoid that at all costs, and in that case, you're almost letting them have free reign because you're so afraid to micromanage, Don't just think that you have to switch all the way to control, like, and be in that mode, but this is where you can allow healthy parameters. And that's why I'm always so big that we we have the clear mission statement for what we're all trying to achieve. Your purpose, your vision, whatever it is that you want to call that. And then you have expectations and values in place for how everybody who says, yes, I want to be on this team, agrees to comply with, agrees to be this type of a person to be on this team. And then you have their individual job descriptions and their individual goals for what they're supposed to do. When you put that entire framework in place, which is exactly what I help my clients do, when you put that framework in place, do you see how that is going to take off the pressure of you thinking you have to control and manage and like oversee everything? So here's another question you want to ask yourself. Do you know how to delegate? And this, as a leader, is one of the things that can make it so hard, so overwhelming on you, is because if you're not delegating, then who's doing all the work? You? That's a really heavy burden to carry. If you are delegating, but then you're not trusting them, you're trying to control over everything, and it's like in that first example, you're bringing it back and you're having to redo everything to get it to your standards exactly how you would want it done, then that's not really that's not really delegating either, because that's bringing it all back and putting all the pressure on you. And so you've got to learn how to be able to delegate without having to take in and jump in. So the way that this attaches to parenting is that you can sometimes see parents who are like, yeah, honey, go do it. And they're like, oh, no, let me fix that for you. Just let me do it. Honey, I got it. I'll do it for you. And that's not helpful, because that doesn't help the child to learn and to grow. And it's also not helpful for you at work. It's not going to help your employees, your contractors, learn how to strengthen themselves and learn their ability. So once again, going back, if you have the clear vision and you have clear expectations and values in place, then you set those clear job descriptions and keep them accountable to it. And if that's the case, if they can't meet it, then just assess what needs to solve. And we're going to do that in a future episode on the Friday 15, is breaking down and making sure you understand how to do that and how to assess when they're not meeting it, what needs to be changed, what needs to be fixed. But for right now, just understand, like, you as the leader, are you able to delegate, or are you stepping in parent mode and starting to control and starting to take over? You see the difference there? All right, looking at my notes. Oh, perfect. Are you getting overly emotionally attached to your employees? Just like you would as a parent. So let's go into mommy mode for a second. And you're looking and you're just like, oh, just every single thing that they do delights you. But then anything they do wrong, you take on as like, that's your fault. That's on you. And that's a tough spot to be. I can remember one of my children being 3 and being in pre-K or preschool, whatever you call it. And I got called in, and because the child was being bad, I mean, flat out, just misbehaving. And they called me in, and the headmistress, or whatever you call her, who runs the place, and her assistant sat me down, put me in a chair, stared at me like I was the bad child. And first of all, this is coming from somebody who's I never knew my principals, because I never got called to the principal's office. I was like, walk the line, be good, do all the things. And here I am as a mother being called into the principal's office because my kid is bad. And I'm sitting there, and she's just, I was taking it as an attack, because she was like, you. Like, I'm like, what about him? I'm his parent. Yeah, I can tell him, be good, do this, but he has free will, even at 3, right? He has his own choices to make. And I was really emotionally distraught in that moment. But later I thought about that. I was like, that's on her. How she's trying to come after me, that I can somehow manipulate and control my child. No. And so I didn't take that on to mean anything about how I'm mothering. I knew I was okay as a mother, but that child is still going to have his moments and still going to do what he wants to do, no matter how good I'm showing up as a mom. And the same thing, a child can be really, really amazing. And yet, is that all for me to take on and be like, woohoo, look at my parenting skills? No, that's on the child in their own performance. So the same is true. Are you getting overly emotionally attached to your employees, thinking that everything they do that's a win is your win? Yeah, look at how great I am. And everything they do wrong, you're like, oh, obviously I can't lead. Obviously I'm a horrible manager. No, that's being overly emotionally invested. And sometimes that's where you need a mindset shift. You need to get some coaching on that, but working through that, because otherwise you're going to take on too much emotional baggage and it's going to make your job so much heavier, right? It's going to be so much more challenging when you have to take on all these emotions. And with that, the other thing I want you to ask is think about too, another way that you could be parenting your employees is you're trying to make them feel good all the time. You're trying to take on their emotional well-being. And this might stop you from having tough conversations that need to be had. This might stop you from holding them accountable and keeping them to their deadlines because you're like, oh, okay. Just like you might with a child. And a lot of parents fall into this trap of like, instead of keeping their kids accountable to things, it's like, oh, sweetie, okay. I'll do it for you, or I'll help you out, or I understand. It's been a tough week, baby. Or trying to always make your kids feel good. How many times do people send their kids off to school? Have a great day. Everything's about being great. Everything's about feeling awesome all the time. Everything's good. But we know in life, that's just not the way it is. There is this balance in life of up and down, and it's what makes us appreciate the good days even more. You trying to take on your emotional well-being for your employees is really, really daunting. I can't say that any other way. It is so exhausting if you feel emotionally responsible for their well-being. And you're taking on their emotions. And when they bicker, when they fight, when they get upset, you take that on emotionally. That's a lot, especially if you're empathic and you're like carrying all these emotions around with you. That's where you can burn out and really feel a lot of stress. So think about that as far as, are you stepping in and trying to almost manipulate the day, take control of the day in a way to make your employees feel a certain way, to protect them, to hedge them. Just everything's going to be good. Everything's going to feel so great around here. Work with them. Help them to mature. Help them to develop. And same for you. And however you need to do that. All right. Getting to a couple more in the couple minutes we have left here. When you are seeking outcomes from their performance for how you want to feel. Okay. So you are like hiring people to make you feel better about yourself. You're hiring people and putting them in place to get the outcomes that you yourself might be struggling to do. So here's an example is I get a lot of people. So I've been in marketing and corporate leadership for 20 years. And one of the things when I first went out on my own was I was getting hired to do the marketing work, and people would hire me in their businesses and be like, I hate marketing. I hate doing these types of things. And they're just like giving it over to me. But they haven't taken ownership for learning how to do this themselves. And I'm not saying they have to get to be to my level of expertise, but they are just wanting to give away all their power. They're not making any of the choices. They're just trying to give it away. And this is really a place where you need to balance that for yourselves. So watch these. These is why I'm saying they fall into the same traps we tend to do as parents. And we bring that behavior over and we start to do that when we're leading our team. And the reason we do that is because we don't have good models in place to teach us how to lead. And the only place that a lot of us have known in the past that we were ever leading is watching our parents and now becoming a parent. Maybe you haven't had a great, amazing leader. Maybe you haven't had leadership coach training. Maybe you haven't had these different things in place to help you to model, to know what to do. No judgment there. I'm just calling it out because that is the majority of leaders in corporate America have not been given this training and not been given this assistance. Maybe you never even played on a sports team and had a coach to see leadership in that capacity. And so leadership is foreign to you. Maybe you're like me and you avoided taking on management roles for so long because you didn't want to lead. That seemed like a nightmare to you. Yeah. And now here I am teaching leadership coaching. It's like full circle because I learned the secret that I didn't have to know it. It's not something you have to be born with. It's something you have to learn and a skill you work and acquire. There are proven models that you can implement to help you to do this, to make this easier.